Hello, everybody, again. Well, I'm actually, again, very excited. This is one of my favorite talks to give and one of my favorite passages to dig into. We're going to be talking about Matthew 25 today. So if you have your Bibles or your iPhones, please do, pull it out. But we're going to not start, actually, in 25. We're going to start in 23. So we're going to flip back because we need context. I really do believe that one of the reasons why things are as crazy right now as they are is because we've actually moved away from the text. All of us have. Almost the entire church rarely even goes back into this text very much and goes very deep when they do. So I really believe that one of the key things in terms of exegeting text is understanding context. And so one of the things we have to understand about this context that Jesus is standing here proclaiming Matthew 25 is that 23 just happened. In 23, we see Jesus in the temple. We see Jesus being cornered, actually, by the Sanhedrin, by the Sadducees, Pharisees, and scribes. And we also see that they have been plotting for him to get him for a while, and now he's finally inside the temple. And we see Jesus kind of lose it at one point. At one point, he says, "Woe to you, scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites, for you clean the outside of the cup and of the plate, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. You blind Pharisee," with an exclamation point in English. "For you are like," did I skip? "For you clean, blah, 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 you blind." Here. "First clean the inside of the cups so that the outside also may become clean. And then, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees and hypocrites, for you are like whitewashed tombs, which on the outside look beautiful, but inside they are full of the bones of the dead and of all kinds of, filth." Can we get any more graphic here? "So you also on the outside look righteous to others, but inside you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness." Wow. And then drop down just a few verses, and Jesus keeps going. "You snakes! You brood of vipers! How can you escape being sentenced to hell?" What? Wow. Let me just say, I just would not want to be one of them on that day. That's what I would not want to be standing there on that day. So how did this happen? What's going on here? The thing is, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes, they were part of the Sanhedrin, the ruling body, the group who actually decided what folks were going to do and basically governed the people. The Sanhedrin was the religious and civic governing spot in the temple under Roman rule. It brought together the Pharisees, who were the theologians, and the Sadducees, which were very much kind of the governing, civil governing body, and the scribes, who were like the lawyers, the ones who kind of parsed the word. And the thing about the Pharisees in particular at this moment is that they were calling the people to abide by the Roman law as much as they were calling people to abide by the Hebrew law in order to be clean, in order to be acceptable to God. And the way that things were working is that those laws were actually heaping oppression upon the people. So in the context of Jesus standing in this temple, poverty is rampant. And the very year that Jesus was born, there was a pogrom in the land. The year that Jesus was born, there was an attempted uprising to throw off the oppression of Caesar. And 2,000 people were crucified in one day, according to Josephus. And so this is the context. It is an incredibly political era. It is an incredibly tense time, and the people are desperate. And the Sanhedrin, all of these bodies are meant to be the leaders. They were the ones who were called to actually shepherd the people, to protect them, to cultivate them, to serve them. And what we see of their leadership is that rather than serving them, there is hypocrisy and lawlessness. And they are as snakes and broods of vipers. So Jesus takes his disciples and he's like, yo guys, let's go across the street. So they bolt, they're out, right? And so they go and they literally kind of go across the street to the Garden of Gethsemane. The Garden of Gethsemane is, opposite it and above. And so when you're there, you look out and you literally see the temple is right there. So as they're looking at the temple, that's when Jesus breaks into Matthew 25. And Jesus talks about what it's going to be like in the end. In this time when the Son of Man comes. The Son of Man will come in his glory and all the angels with him, and then he will sit on the throne of his glory. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. So let's just think about this for a minute. We're going to do a lot of word study in this. So I'm a very, very curious person, and I was curious about the text when I was reading it. And I said to myself, first of all, I got my second master's degree in human rights at Columbia. And in the midst of that, I learned that, nations, the way that we understand them today, nation states didn't exist back then. They're really a modern construct. So what were they talking about here when it says all the nations will be gathered? Well, it's not like Yugoslavia, or former Yugoslavia. It's not USA. It's not Mexico. What are they talking about here? So that word, the nations, when you translate it, actually is people groups or ethnic groups. And so it's really weird. So all the ethnic groups, all the people groups will be gathered before God. And God will separate people one from another. Now, I don't know why, but I got curious about that word people. I thought to myself, is that the word people or is that another word? And I found out it's not the word people. It's the word them. We'll separate them. Well, that's a pronoun. And when we look at a pronoun, you can understand what that pronoun is referring to when you look back at the clearest noun that came before it, just before it. And that would be the nations. That would be the ethnic groups, the people groups. So how this would actually read would be, the Son of Man comes in his glory. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, and all the angels with him, then he will sit on the throne of his glory, and all the people groups will be gathered before him. And he will separate the people groups, one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. Now, whoa. We don't even really know what to do with that. And so actually we retranslated that to say people, and so we individualized it. And when we read that text, we normally usually think of individuals being kind of separated from each other, but that is not what the text says. The text is talking about groups. Now keep going forward, and he will put the sheep at his right hand and the goats at his left. And then the king will say to those at his right hand, come, you are blessed by my Father. Inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. So let's just go a little bit further. This word king means king, so there you go. But when I thought about it, I thought, this actually looks really familiar, this image. And it is familiar. When you flip back, to Micah 4, 1 through 5, you see this picture. You see a picture of the king on the highest mountain, surrounded by all the nations, all the ethnic groups, all the people groups. And they are coming, and that king, it's that king that is surrounded by the ethnic groups that we're talking about here. And that king says, come. Come. Now, this word come in the context is actually an invitation to intimacy. Imagine that. The king is inviting the ones on the right into deeper intimacy. Wow. I imagine myself going and crawling up in my daddy's lap, right? It's that kind of intimacy. Come. You that are blessed by my Father. To bless culturally is to speak well of, as to curse is actually to speak poorly of. To bless here is to be spoken well of by the king. Do you ever think that God is speaking about you? Think about that for a minute. And imagine God speaking well of you. Come. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me. So let's just sit for a minute on that word for, because it's a logical connector. It connects logic. What came before it happens because of this. For the king, that king from Micah 4, 1 through 5, that king will invite those on his right into deeper intimacy, and he speaks well of us. For I, Jesus, I was hungry. I was hungry. This word hungry, I got curious and I did a little study of it. And it actually doesn't just mean I'm hungry. It's more like I'm hangry, right? It actually means literally famished. It means don't know where the next meal is coming from and haven't had a meal in a very long time. It means famished. So when you study famine in the world, usually famines happen not because all of a sudden the ground just decides not to do anything. It's usually because we have raped the land by doing the same crops, monocropping over and over and over again. Or famine happens because we have legislated environmental regulations, and they did these things then too, that have not cared for the land. And so here we have famine. Think swollen bellies and flies in the eyes. You were hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty. That word thirsty means thirsty, so there you go. And you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. That word stranger is actually like an immigrant traveling through the land. I was an immigrant, and you welcomed me. And that word naked, there's in Berkeley, anybody here from Berkeley area, San Francisco Bay Area? Okay, hey, the lone person over here, one person. Okay, so, 2, there we go. 3, hey, there we go. So there's this guy, and you guys might know him or have seen him before on the campus of UC Berkeley. I don't know if he's still there, but he was there back when I was in school. We would travel up there sometime. And he was called Naked Man. He would literally stand on the campus and kind of berate people as they went past him, and they were telling him, get on some clothes. And he would just berate them. but he was naked man. And there's a guy in Times Square today, who does this. He actually goes out in Times Square naked. That's not what we're talking about here. We're not talking about that. We're not talking about naked by choice. This word literally means stripped. Stripped. To the stripped ones. To the ones who've been stripped of everything they have, not by choice. I was stripped, and you gave me clothing. I was sick. This word sick, it actually doesn't mean just what I have today, a little bit of a cough. It means diseased. Diseased. And I never really thought about it, but it's true. Like that back then, they lived on earth. They were humans. They didn't just have leprosy. They also had cancer. They also had Crohn's. They also probably had rickets. They also had all kinds of diseases that impacted them. I was diseased, and you took care of me. And I was in prison. And that word prison means prison, so there you go. But one thing that strikes me is that in the context of a time when political imprisonment was just as likely, maybe even more likely, than criminal imprisonment, we might be talking more about political prisoner, someone who is a prisoner because they tried to overturn the empire, the powers of Rome that were exacting against the people. And you visited me. So then we get to this place that I believe is really literally a hinge point in the text. And it says, then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you? Let's just sit for a minute on the word righteous. Then the righteous will answer him. Because that word righteous, just around your tables for literally 1 minute, I'm going to give you 60 seconds. I'd like for you to discuss, and if you're only at a table with 1 or 2 people, I'd like for you to move to go to a table where there's more people. Hello, somebody. What's the first thing that comes to your mind when you think of the word righteous? What's the first thing that comes to the mind when you think of the word righteous? Go. You get 1 minute. So around your tables, what is it that you discussed? Just a few people, just call it out. When you think of righteous, what do you think of? What are the things that you think of? Self-righteous. Rigid. Right with God. Smug. What? Doing what God wants? Doing what God wants. Say it again. Forcefully good. Well, somebody's been listening. And I still didn't hear, is it your? Pure. Oh, okay, somebody. All right, so I studied the text, and I actually went to a friend of mine who is a biblical scholar. I'm not. He's a biblical scholar, and I said, what does this actually mean? And I said, the Strong's tells me it means this. He goes, that's actually correct. So his name is Terry McGonigal, Dr. Terry McGonigal. He's a biblical scholar. He's actually the person who was my professor of shalom when I first learned about shalom. And what he said is that there is only one way to interpret this word, righteous, in the text. It is just. And actually, if you parse it, if you split the hair, if you get really down to the nitty-gritty of it, it's ones of equitable action and character. Ones of equitable action and character. So you read that completely different when you understand that, right? Then the just ones will answer him. Then the ones of equitable action and character will answer him. So equitable action and character. What is equity? What does that mean? What is equity? I once was at a gathering, an ecumenical gathering, of religious, literally national religious leaders from all streams of the church. And they got into a conversation about what is the difference between equity and equality. And honestly, in that room, there was no real answer. They were like, well, we don't really know. And they literally said that. We don't really have clarity about that. So I shared with them what I like, how I've come to understand it. And people were like, oh, okay, so here's what I shared with them. Imagine that we have two buckets. I have two buckets in my hands. You might need to pull out the camera for this to see it. Okay, we'll go like this. Okay, so I have two buckets in my hands, right? One bucket is full of 1,000 gold coins. 1,000 gold coins. And the other one is full of 1,000 pennies. 1,000 pennies. Do I have an equal number of coins in the bucket? Yeah, right, exactly. Do I have an equitable distribution of resources? That is the difference. That's it. That's the difference between equality and equity. Now, let's take it into today. So if you were going to look at, let's look at the mean, base of wealth of people of European descent in the United States. So mean, that's like the middle, right? So we're looking like middle. Base of wealth of people in the United States. Some of you might actually know this, right? So if you're doing any kind of study, doing justice work, you've probably heard this before. But a lot of this work was done in the last decade where we began to understand the impact of inequity. So, but think about that. What is it? What would you imagine? Let's just call out some numbers. What would you imagine is the mean base of wealth? That is assets minus debt, right? So assets minus debt. What do you think is the mean base of wealth of people of European descent in the United States? Just give me some numbers. 120,000. Higher, lower, higher, lower. Higher. Okay, say it. Give me some numbers. 300,000. Okay, 300,000. Anybody else? A million. Okay, higher, lower. Okay, okay, just for the sake of time. $116,000 is the mean. That's the mean. So when you look at the 116,000, now let's look at people of African descent in the United States. So people of African, now remember what we're talking about is the middle class, right? So, and we're not talking about income. That's a whole other number, right? We're talking about base of wealth, assets minus debt. So what do you think it is for people of African descent in the United States? The mean, the middle. What do you think it is? 80,000, 80,000. Can I get higher or lower? Okay, so give me some numbers. 60,000, 60,000. Anybody want to go higher? 20,000, 45,000. It is 6,000. That is the difference between equality and equity today. Because these are all middle class. They're probably, making, probably not making comparable paychecks. Hello, somebody. That's a whole other discussion. But they don't have the same base of wealth. They don't have the same parachute in case things go wrong at all. So there's literally like a $90,000 gap, $95,000 gap there. So now, I want you to imagine, anybody here like soccer? Anybody like soccer? Oh, cool. Okay, cool. So I have to tell you, I don't really like soccer that much. It just takes too long to score. I'm like, oh my God, these things, seriously, you could go the whole game and only get 2 goals. What in the world? What are we watching this thing for? I'm sorry. But I have seen some pretty amazing games, right? And one time I saw this amazing game between Germany and Argentina, and it was the World Cup, and it was like they went into triple overtime, and they won it in penalty kicks, and it was amazing. It was really amazing, right? And so I started thinking about this question of equity. And I started thinking about what you're talking about when you're talking about equity is the way things work. You're not just talking about the end result, you're talking about what gets us there. The way things work is inequitable. Here's a good illustration. Imagine that we are at the World Cup, And that there is this one team who just by the rules, by the rules and the structure of the game, they always have to play uphill on a slant. It's just the way that the rules go. This is just their lot in life, this one team. And wherever they play in the World Cup, they're going to have to play on a field that goes on a 45-degree slant. Okay? It's a pretty high slant, right? So 45-degree slant. Is this team ever going to win the World Cup? No. The answer is no, right? So that's, like, I think pretty obvious, right? So what I want you to do now at your tables is I want you to figure out what would it take to make this equitable? What would it take to level this playing field? What would it take to make it fair? Because that's ultimately what equitability is. It's fairness. All right, so turn in your tables. You get now 5 minutes. 5 minutes to come up with 1 or 2 ways to level this playing field. Go. So, could I get a few people to just share with us, what did you guys come up with at your tables? What did you come up with at your tables? Okay, so I just had one person call out. They're going to get taller players on that one team in order to make things more equitable. Okay, so that's a structural change. Bulldozers. Hold on, folks, hold on. So I'll call you one at a time. How about that? Okay, so the bulldozers. Do that one. Explain that. So that's different than bulldozers. So one of them is, just explain exactly what, first of all, so that everybody can hear you. So say it again, just very quickly, the bulldozers. Bulldozers to change the field. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, and then, over here. Switch sides at the half. To give the same, disadvantage to both teams. That's a good solution too. Over here. Yeah, so that was, thank you so much. The first time I ever heard that was somebody in Croatia who actually said, we need to turn the field a quarter, like you said, so that everybody runs on a slant. That's not a bad idea, right? Okay, how about somebody else? So these are structural changes you're talking about. Okay, go on. Over here. Fill the ball with helium so that it rises. Okay, that's a first. I've never before. That's good. Okay, and let's go back here. Imagine that. Level the playing field. Take it out. Like, you can also dredge out the dirt. Okay, any other thoughts? Okay. I can't hear you say. Yes. Okay, so thank you. Croatia again as well. Put jetpacks on the folks and actually, on the disadvantaged team so they can actually fly upfield. That would give them an opportunity. Okay, back here. Change the rules to mean what? To do what? What? Like what? Get rid of that rule. Get rid of the rule altogether. Okay, that's good. Anybody else? Anybody else? Here. Ooh, wow. She said, eliminate the idea of opposition. Whoa. That would kind of be a different game, wouldn't it? Change the game. Okay. Oh, you guys are so great. Okay, so what we're talking about here is we're talking about how to make things more equitable, right? What we're talking about is not even just more, but equitable. What does it take? Because you see, Jesus when Jesus looks at that soccer team, Jesus says, and the just ones say, there is no way on earth that we can stand for a game that has these rules and this structure. We must change the structure or the rules or the game, but we will not stand for a World Cup where this team has no capacity to win, where this team has the expectation to be dominated every time. The just ones can't stand for it. The ones of equitable action and character take it upon themselves to level the playing field. So, when we go further in the text, the people have said, when did we do all of this? And Jesus says, and the king will answer them, truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these, who are members of my family, you did it to me. The thing that really struck me as I was thinking about this text is that Jesus doesn't say, because I love the disadvantaged, because I love the vulnerable, you need to love them. Jesus says, I am them. They are me. It is not possible to love Jesus and be okay with inequity. It is not possible. So the ones of equitable character and action look at the food system and they ask the question, how can we level this playing field? How can we make the distribution of good food in our city, in our town, more equitable? How can we eliminate altogether the reality of food deserts, where you cannot find healthy food within a 5-mile radius? The ones of equitable action and character look at Flint and Washington, D.C., and many of our cities, and many of our rural areas where coal mining is happening, and dumping is happening in poor neighborhoods, and they ask the question, how can we make the distribution of clean water a reality equitably? And they look at our immigration system and they ask the very profound question, who is getting more welcome here? And who is not being welcomed here? And how can we change the way things work so that welcome is distributed equitably? And they look at our healthcare system. And in New York City, urban metropolis, prides itself on being a liberal city, progressive city. And they would look at that city and they would ask the question, why are there 2 healthcare systems at work in New York City? Why is there one system for the poor and another system for the rich? Why are there 2 separate entrances to hospitals? one for people who have health care and one for people who don't? Why do we have a world where not everybody has health care? And they would look at the system that we call the justice system. And they would ask the question, New Jersey, of why it is that the vast majority of people who get locked behind bars for drug offenses are people of color, specifically black people. And yet they're doing drugs at the same rate, New Jersey. And why is it the case that women are used in those systems, locked up, even though DAs know they did no wrong, because they are the gatekeeper to their boyfriends? How could we do this if we loved equity? We would ask ourselves, who is having an inequitable distribution of interactions with the justice system? Because the righteous, the just ones, the ones of equitable action and character could not stand a world where people have to play on uneven playing fields. So they would get busy. So I'm going to send you back to your tables one more time, and I'm going to ask you to get busy as your spiritual act of worship, as a walk on the road of discipleship, as a walk to this day, when God says, God spoke well of you. Go around your tables, and I'd like for you to choose one system that's at work in your area and share one idea of how you could level the playing field. People, you, the community, you, the collective community of people who aren't even in this room, might be able to help level the playing field in your city, your town, your state, for one issue that you care about. And so what I'd like to do now is to have a few people share with us what you talked about around your tables. This is a moment we are sitting in right now that we have never seen before in American history. Senator Lamar Alexander last night issued a statement just moments after the impeachment trial went forward, before the question portion of the impeachment trial, saying that he agreed with the House managers that our president did wrong, that they proved their case, and yet he didn't need to hear any witnesses. He didn't need to hear any witnesses. And it's not enough to impeach. And yet some of the witnesses that we actually heard in the House manager's testimony that they did actually get to show forward at different points was that the witnesses themselves said, if this is not impeachable, then nothing else is. If it's not impeachable to threaten the rule of law in a constitutional democratic republic, then what else is? And friends, make no mistake, the rule of law in a constitutional democratic republic, though it often is not practiced equitably, the expectation of it is the only thing that stands between the mass oppression of the vulnerable and their protection. I'm not sure I can, but I'll try. I didn't plan on saying that. It feels like the Spirit. That the rule of law, though often not practiced, the expectation of it is what stands between the mass oppression of the vulnerable and their protection. And so as we talk about equity and leveling playing fields, right now we are literally at a moment. We are at a moment in our nation where the vulnerable are becoming more vulnerable. And the church, as the church, must stand up, must call for the restoration of our Constitution, which demands fair trials. Now that was my soapbox. What's yours? Let's have one or two people around the room, maybe three if we can manage it with time, share what are some ways that you saw to level playing fields in the areas, the issues that you care about. Can I just get somebody to stand up and share? Okay, there's the mic is over here. Very good.
One of the things we discussed was affordable housing, which is a big major issue in this country, and I'm from Canada, so it's in ours too. And the story that came out is, are we paying our employees as churches enough to live in the neighborhoods where the churches sit, or even in the city where the churches sit?
Yes. Take that one and run with it. Take that one and run with it. Thank you so much, sir. Is there anybody else? Okay, over here.
As sad as it is, we work to teach kids how to take care of themselves. So our church partners with our local high school, and we've created a food pantry for kids to go in and take food, take feminine care supplies, toilet paper, diapers, wipes home with them over the weekend so that their family has supplies. This is something that I've also been seeing in more local schools in Iowa. Schools are offering kids the chance to take home what they need, and while it's heartbreaking, it's still good that we're taking time to educate kids about healthy eating and making sure they have what they need of products that are quality. So
that's awesome. Let me just say very quickly, and you can take a seat, that's fine. But let me just say that compassionate ministry, it alleviates the suffering. It lifts some of the suffering of the most vulnerable, of the impoverished. The next step is to ask, how will your church now begin to engage the powers that made your pantry necessary in the first place? That's the next step. And there are people who are doing that work in your town. So I want to charge you and everybody else who's in that situation to find those people and walk with them, because that's the power of the church. We have bodies we can add to this march. We have finances and resources that we can add to the struggle to make it so that those children don't need to come to a church pantry to pick up feminine supplies. You hear me? Thank you. Very good. Over here.
So we talked about how children in schools now can't get lunches because they don't have the funds. And we think that the churches of that community could help the schools by paying for those children who need their lunches so that the children can eat lunch and not feel ashamed because the schools berate them or take their lunch if they don't have the money.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. We're gonna because of time, I'm going to now wrap us up. Let's see how the text ends. Then he will say to those at his left hand, "You that are accursed, you that are not spoken well of by my Father, depart from me into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels." Yo, y'all. Wow. "For I was hangry, and you gave me no food. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not welcome me. Naked, stripped, and you did not give me clothing. Diseased and imprisoned, and you did not visit me." And then they also will answer, "Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and did not take care of you?" And then he will answer them, "Truly, I tell you, just as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me." Friends, two things. One, we often do not, first of all, in more progressive circles, as I am imagining this room probably is, or at least a lot of you are, people don't like to talk about hell. Jesus talks about hell. All right? Y'all, we're going to deal with this. But the thing is, Jesus doesn't talk about hell the way that most of the church talks about hell. Jesus has a different understanding of who's going there. And let me say that Jesus, the one who went into the grave, the one who beat death, Jesus says that equity, justice is the thing that is going to make the difference. Justice. Did you protect, cultivate, and serve the image of God on earth? If you did not, you won't like heaven. Heaven is full of God. If you were at war with God on earth, why should you now want to go to heaven? If you were at war with the image of God on earth, then you'll remain separated from God for eternity. It is a salvation issue. Because the good news is the King of the kingdom of God came to confront the kingdoms of men that are hell-bent on crushing the image of God on earth. And the just ones, the ones of equitable action and character, saw it as their mission to protect the image of God on earth. And let's go back quickly to the scene at the beginning of this passage when Jesus takes his homies and goes across the street, and now they're looking at the temple. Imagine them looking at the temple. Jesus has just said all of this. Is this works righteousness? No. We know from the Psalms, Psalm 146, we know what the Lord actually does. If you have the Holy Spirit in you, you will do as the Holy Spirit does. And this is what the Holy Spirit does. The Lord sets the prisoners free. Psalm 146, 8. The Lord opens the eyes of the blind. The Lord lifts up those who are bowed down. The Lord loves the just ones. The Lord watches over the immigrants. The Lord upholds the orphan and the widow, but the way of the wicked he brings to ruin. but, another logical connector, but whatever comes after it is the opposite of what came before it. But the way of the wicked. Well, wickedness then in this context is the opposite of all that came before it. Wickedness is the opposite of caring for the least of these. That's what wickedness is. And Jesus takes his homies across the street and looks at the temple. And inside that temple, the people who he just finished arguing with, who he called a brood of vipers, they believe that they are the chosen because of their ethnic group, because of their race as Jews. They believe that it's their race that saves them. But I believe that in this passage, Jesus actually just created a whole new people group. And that people group are the ones of equitable action and character, the just ones. The question left for us and for the church is, will we be among the just ones? Amen.